Hey guys, welcome to Blazing Guitars, where we talk about worship, gear, music, guitar, and everything in between. My name is Blaze Nelson, and today I wanted to talk about some things that I would take into consideration when I was putting together a worship team. Before we jump into it, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, or concerns, please leave a comment below. And if you'd like to support the channel, Patreon is linked in the description below. So let's get into it. So there's an important disclaimer that I think needs to be made before we go any further. I am not you, and I'm not the person that God has put in your church to lead your congregation in worship. I don't know your church's culture, I don't know your church's values, I don't know the talent in your church, and this is not meant to be a video that says you need 3 electric guitars, an acoustic, and 6 singers, right? No. Because we've seen God use all kinds of different scenarios. We've seen God use orchestras and choirs and just huge bands with 100 people on stage, and we've seen God use singer-songwriters because God can use who He has in place where He has them. So God can use you with whoever you have behind you, whether it's a full band or just yourself. God can still use you. But these are things that I think are important to take into consideration as you're adding more people or as you're trying to form a team. These are things that can really help lead you forward in that, but they're not meant to be hard guidelines, and they're not meant to make you feel guilty if you don't follow them. If you follow nothing on this channel, that's totally fine, because I'm not you. And so these are just meant as talking points, and I hope that's taken that way. So let's jump into 3 things that I think would be really helpful as you're putting together a worship team. So the first step to putting together an effective worship team is to find out what the goal and vision of your church leadership is. God has placed your church leadership to lead and guide the flock, and you want to make sure that as you're putting together a team or as you're leading a team, that your team is serving that vision and mission. If you and church leadership are going the opposite directions, then what that's going to do is it's going to create a bunch of dysfunction and a church that's just dead in the water, which is what nobody wants. So sit down with your church leadership and have an open and honest conversation about what they're really looking for in a worship service. Ask them what kind of songs they want to hear. Ask them what kind of instruments they want on stage. Ask them how loud it wants to be. And when you do that, you are starting this trust building. And as you build more trust, then you're going to be able to work as a team a lot more effectively with your church leadership and with your own worship team. The second step is to do what you do and do it well. When I was in high school, we did some work with a sister church, and that church had, I think at the time it was like 11 bands, and they were putting out music, and they had great guitarists and great musicians, great music, and they're writing their own music. And they would have these conferences where they would say that our goal is to be the best bands in the world. So we came back to our little church and we would be like, man, we're going to be the best bands in the world. And what that did was that created this expectation that was really hard, because we would look around us and it became obvious that we weren't the best band going on. We even did a battle of the bands, a battle of the Christian bands in town, and won 3rd place out of 3. You know, we were struggling along and just really struggling with this calling to be the best band in the world. And I think as I've grown, what I've realized is that's not the goal. The goal is not to be the best bands in the world. The goal is to be the best bands that we can be. And the goal is to be the best band and the best band leader that God has made me to be. What that does is that requires us to let things go and to accept that we have certain talents and we have certain giftings that God has given us that we have to use in those ways. And it might not be that you're the best guitar player in the world, but you might be the only guitar player in your church. So then the calling becomes, you have to be the best guitar player that you can be. And I'm not saying the best guitar player, period. I'm saying the best guitar player that you can be. If that means that you can only practice for 20 minutes because you have responsibilities to your wife and kids and to other church things, then so be it. That's what that means. Now, I think there's a fine line in that, right? We don't want to just show up and fumble through service all day. We really want it to be a blessing for the church, right? So that does require some time, and it does require some practice. And if you can't put in the time to be an effective guitar player, then maybe you find another guitar player or somebody else that you can tap on the shoulder to be there with you and help you through this. So I think that's really important to keep in mind, is that your calling is not to be the best in the world. Your calling is to be the best that you can be. And sometimes I also think that means that you need to simplify. If you have a huge band with a bunch of mediocre players and every week it's not getting any better, then what you might want to take into consideration is that it might be time to start trimming off members until you can build up a stronger base. we've had seasons in our church where it's been me as a guitarist and a piano player and a drummer, and that's it. And what that did was that really allowed us to kind of take a step back, and there was no expectation, and there's no, we weren't going to be the best band with that. But it allowed us to create this really solid base that we could then add other pieces onto. And even though I'm the only remaining member of that core, our band is still doing really well because we've added people in as our band has grown. So what we did was we created a good foundation and then added people on top of that. And so we would be mediocre, and then we'd get better and better and better and better, and then we would add somebody in, and then we'd get a little bit less good, but then we would start climbing up again. Then we'd add somebody new, and we'd keep climbing up. And I think that's an important process to understand and realize as you're leading people, is that sometimes if you have 15 people on stage and none of them are really strong musicians, it might be time to just simplify for a season, and then to start adding those people back in it once you have a good foundation and a good solid set. So the final point that I think is really important is to make sure that you focus on maintaining healthy relationships within your team. If you guys are walking in and just things are festering and building up and not getting resolved, then you're not being an effective worship team. Your relationships and the way that you treat each other is far more important than the output that you do. It's far more important than the music you play. It's far more important than the worship services. We are called to love each other, and that needs to be first and foremost. So if you have a team that's really dysfunctional, sit down and take the time to hash that out. I know that's challenging. I know that's hard to sit down and do, and to force yourself into that, especially when you just want to play music. But do that work. And what that does is that builds, again, we've been talking about foundations, right? It builds this foundation that you can move forward. So keep a clear slate with each other. Maybe even I've had friends that in different churches that have set 72-hour limits on themselves. So if they can't forgive somebody in 72 hours, they'll go back and have a conversation with that person. So set up these safeguards in your relationships, and especially in band, that helps keep you guys on a clear slate and moving forward. Because what's not effective is a band that cannot get along and does not love each other, and they sit up and they sing about the worthiness and the holiness of God, and they encourage the church to love each other when they can't do it themselves. So it's important to maintain healthy relationships and to make sure that you are doing that, especially if you're just forming a band. Set that foundation, and then you'll just reap the benefits of it afterwards. So I hope that was helpful. Again, I think the three important things that for what your worship team should look like is a worship team that is united with church leadership and is working towards the same goal, doing what you do well, and to take into consideration and to simplify and to start with a good foundation, and then to keep good, healthy relationships moving forward. So if you have any questions, please leave a comment below, and let's start a conversation. I think this is really important stuff to think about, and thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.